It's 1865. Booker T. Washington is on a Virginia plantation, and the people who were enslaved there are walking down the road free because for the first time in their lives they can. As I'm reading this scene in his autobiography, Booker T tells me what I expect. There's great rejoicing, he says, thanksgiving, and even says wild scenes of ecstasy. And this went on for a little while. And then he began to say things that I've never heard anywhere, especially not school. He said, after tasting freedom just for a few hours, the slave quarters went quiet. Why? And I quote Booker T. Washington in his autobiography: the great responsibility of being free, of having charge of themselves, of having to think and plan for themselves and their children seemed to take possession of them. It was very much like suddenly turning a youth of 10 or 12 years old out into the world to provide for himself. In a few hours, the great questions with which the Anglo-Saxon race had been grappling for centuries had been thrown upon these people to be solved. Of course, they tried on freedom for themselves. But then he continues to shock me. He says that many people came back to the plantation after they remained away for a while. Many of the older slaves, especially, returned to their old homes and made a kind of contract with their former owners by which they've remained at the estate. Washington goes on to say there was like a familial-like bond between owner and slave. And he writes about former slaves sending money to their former owners, just crazy, who had fallen into poverty. He said there was no bitterness towards slave owners. He said there's many instances of them, former slaves, tenderly, in his words, caring for the former masters and mistresses who had become poor and dependent since the war. They even supplied them with money for years to keep them from suffering, and even participating in educating their children. And he said things on and on and on that continue to shock me throughout this book. And one of the things that really shifted my perspective is just his view, this like growth mindset that you and I have talked about, Ronnie, on in a lot of these videos, is that he viewed slavery as like a way that the slaves learned work, discipline, endurance, usefulness. And despite the cruelties of slavery, he goes as far as saying that the enslaved were better off than non-slaves because they went through the challenges of slavery and learned the skills and trades. And so I picked up this book up from slavery thinking I understood slavery. And by the time I put it down, it changed me forever, literally.
Yeah, that was a great summary. A lot of those points I had in there as well. Just it just blew me away because I never in all throughout my education, high school, college, no one ever taught me or told me about this side of things from the perspective of Booker T. Washington, one of the greatest uh, African American black men in our country, and he's just not talked about very often for some reason. Raised the Tuskegee University basically on his own, was the president for many years, built it by his hands with him and his students, and, educated thousands and thousands of young black men, to help bring up, their, you know, for their future, to help provide for their future. And it's just incredible book. And just like the powerful, like not only his character that he had as a man, but then just the habits and discipline that he built through his life was just it left me a very memorable feeling on myself and helped me get through some of the things that I did. Like you said, one of the quotes that he said he learned that what one of the quotes I enjoyed, he said, he learned that success is to be measured not by the position that one has reached in life or the title, but by the obstacles which he has overcome while trying to succeed. And then that's when he mentioned, looking at it from this standpoint, he reached the conclusion that the Negro boy's birth in connection with slavery actually benefited him versus, uh, and
Yeah.
it's a very, coming from a black man saying it, it's such a very powerful thing who actually went through slavery.
Yeah. Yeah. Just, especially in the last 5 years where, you know, political correctness has been raised to an nth degree. Someone like you or I would say that without this context, we would be, you spit on and feathered and tarred and feathered
Hmm.
for something like that. And it always just blows my mind, especially in, what was it, 2020, when we had the riots that were going on. It was 2020 or 2021, the riots.
Hmm.
There was a bunch of there was a bunch of books that became popular, and it was people that never even were even close to experiencing slavery, but the book literally called Up from Slavery.
Yeah. And no one ever
doesn't get
talked about this one. It just
doesn't get read.
conveniently got missed, or never was the one to get recommended, but this is the one that should have been recommended, one of the top ones,
Yeah.
in my opinion. And I want to go quickly over just his story once they got out of slavery was very powerful as well, where the one thing he talked about that I always remembered was when they left and he was living in West Virginia, he kept talking about how the cabins that they lived in and just the living conditions were much worse, if not intolerable, than the living conditions that he were with his slave owners.
Mm, mm,
And then he was just kept talking about how he was living with a bunch of different people. Some were white people, just the ignorant of the most ignorant of people, just in this motley crew of people of all
mm.
different races and very uneducated. And then he decided, I think he saw like a picture or something of a schoolroom of people learning, and it got him motivated. And then he decided he was going to hitchhike from West Virginia all the way to Hampton Institute in Virginia, and with like no money, just the clothes on his back, and like just an incredible story where he got like halfway there, and then he had to gain more money, but he
Mhm.
didn't have anywhere to live. He was sleeping under this like wooden walkway. He was sleeping under, and then he was working off this dock or something to pull off like something, iron or something off the dock, got
Wow.
enough money, and then finally got to the Hampton Institute. And then it's not like he had a you know got invited there or anything. He just
Right.
showed up and was like it was like, hey, but he was so ragged that they wouldn't let him join at first, so he had to like he had to earn it. So then they basically told him, if you clean uh, the university and it's spick and span, we may let you join. If you can't see any dust particles or anything.
Yeah.
So then he clean until it was like spick and span. Then they let him in. But and that was just the start of this dude's life. And then eventually decided to. Then he basically started the Tuskegee University, and literally it was like one schoolhouse with like 30 kids or whatever. And then he decided they were going to build it himself. And everybody was
Yeah.
telling him, oh, you can't do that. You can't, there's no way you can't get and he just kept telling people, no, they're going to build their university. They're going to build the schoolhouses. They're going to build the, the houses that the kids live in. And then, so the kids didn't have anywhere to live until they built them.
Mhm.
And, one thing that was funny is just all the kids just resisting it at first, and then the parents writing
Yeah.
in saying, "Hey, some of them like wealthy people at this university, so their kids go in there and doing he calls it industry,
Yeah.
these industrious things, and they want them learning books and stuff." But yeah, they're just very
I
awesome.
remember bricklaying. Bricklaying was a huge
Oh yeah,
one. I was teaching, and I've never, I've never done bricklaying, but I remember teaching that skill, and I remember him telling stories. Like there's so many stories of where people went through Tuskegee University and then ended up being very proficient in their local towns and become like the bricklaying person, right? And it'd be
hmm
like this one black person in those times where they're the only one with that skill in a town with white people and black people, right? And it's like these are the types of things he was teaching them, is like this industriousness,
yeah.
uh, where you could
He's
build your own home. You could, and it was crazy. I remember because parents would get pissed off because they're because they would go to school all day and then they would be building homes and gardening and you know what I mean? Like we'd teach
yeah,
them like all the skills of modern life beyond just school, which is like, duh, why wouldn't you
yeah.
do that?
And it blows me away when I was rereading some of these quotes. It's like, we haven't learned anything, because he
No.
was like, if we were to make a permanent impression on the people that come and that we teach, we need to do something besides teach them just books. They need like practical knowledge,
Hmm.
right? Of the things that you talked about, of
Hmm.
like economy and industry, and knowing how to live, like
Gardening.
brush your teeth, like
Yeah.
how to eat properly, how to, and even today's time, like a lot of kids don't know that, or basic, how to balance a checkbook, you know, all those type of things, like how to build habits. Like to me, that's what he was doing, was laying down the groundwork of how to build strong habits with these students that will actually apply into the workforce, and allow them to. I would love to see, how they have like coaching trees,
Hmm.
like like the student coaching tree of Booker T. Washington would be
Yeah.
something to, like
Yeah.
what kind of success did these folks have afterwards? Because I bet you there was a lot.
And it
So
probably was generational, you know.
yeah.
It would be like, hey, it changed the trajectory of this bunch of different families who ended up changing the trajectory onward and upward. I remember him talking about, some of these rich people schools where they would be learning, like I think it was in vogue to learn like Greek and Latin and whatnot, and these like very smart kids, super rich, would be learning know all the Greek and Latin, but they couldn't like grow a carrot or lay a brick or anything else.
hmm
And I remember him talking about that. That made an impression on me. And yeah, his character, like the the ability to have that much character and sustain it amongst those circumstances is just, and then write a book that stands the test of time. There's just like he's one of the greatest of greats. Put him in the likes of the great sages of our time.
hmm The emotional intelligence he had too. I remember one story he was talking about how he was essentially just like keeping your temper, and uh, not letting your emotions get high. And he's like, it's easy to do, or it's not easy to do when like when the bills are due. And he had like, he talked about, he had like these bills due, and he didn't know if the university was going to even make it. And then they got this like unexpected $50,000 gift.
Yeah.
And then he was like, someone asked him, but he was like blunt about it. He was like, it wasn't luck, it was hard work. Nothing ever comes to me that is worth having except as a result of hard work, was his response. And it's just like,
Merit. He talked about merit a lot.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I got
yeah,
that saved quote if you don't have it.
I don't.
He said, "Every persecuted individual and race should get much consolation out of the great human law, which is a universal and internal, that merit, no matter under what skin found, is in the long run recognized and rewarded."
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah,
And that was what 18, whatever 60 something or whatever it was.
yeah,
Uh,
somewhere around
providence
there.
is another word he used a lot that I was really fond of, and there's two really definitions of it. There's like a spiritual definition, the protective care of God or of nature as a spiritual power, or the timely preparation for future eventualities. Uh, and so it's like prudence, foresight, whatever. But there's just it's like fate, and he talks about providence, and I think one of his core things is kind of what you're talking about. Like if you put in the work, the character, the merit, you know, and providence will come for you. You know, like good fate will happen for you, and that was something I really appreciated.
That resonated with me when I read that as well. He at the end of it, his school after 20 years. So he started out in a hen house. I didn't realize it was a hen house. I read in my, which is ridiculous.
It is
Like
ridiculous.
30 students, one teacher in a hen house, broken down shanty hen house. But then 20 years later, they own 2,300 acres, 66 buildings, nearly all built by student labor. It's like you couldn't even fathom doing that. You take
No.
100 kids in any university, you could barely get a desk built.
Oh, 100%, man.
Like you lay out the tools and it's just like, well,
Yeah.
even the teachers, you're just like, oh, figure it out
Yeah.
with
Man.
no YouTube or instructions. You just got one guy teaching them. And that was one thing he talked about a lot was like, he would rather kids learn from people versus books, and he wishes universities would take this stance more often as well. So it's like
Mm,
you can get a much better education learning from your fellow man than from a book. Um, and
interesting.
I think that's powerful, which
It is.
you can do that through books, especially these days more often. You probably didn't quite get it as often back then, right? Biographies and all that. And then obviously podcasts and all that stuff. But yeah, that was one other thing I want to mention.
Tuskegee University has, let me see. I was trying to look how many undergrads it has. It's still there today. Yeah, 2,500, 3,000. It's a smaller school, but it's still there today,
Wow. Yeah.
which is crazy. Probably it's got to be one of the oldest universities in the United States. 1881.
Yeah. I'd love
Yeah.
to check it out one day. There's
Oh,
probably
I
some
know.
cool monuments and stuff. Booker T down there. It's funny
Yeah,
how
but
the one last thing when he only had one name when he started going to school, and they were going around, and he kept hearing people have two names, and some people even had an unnecessary three names. He said, and then he's like, and then he was like, it was coming around. He's like, he only had one name, so he had to like figure it out by the time it got to him what his last name was, and then he just came up with Washington, and he's like, oh, Booker Washington, and that was his name.
oh man,
Incredible.
there's there's another funny thing I remember from that book as well, and I'll just read what he says. It was about, he called it the ministry, and he was saying the ministry was the profession that suffered most and still suffers, though there's been great improvement on account of not only ignorant but in many cases immoral men who claim that they were called to preach. And I think this still happens today, but it was funny. When Way explains it, he says, in the earlier days of freedom, almost every colored man who learned to read would receive a call to preach within a few days after he began reading. At my home in West Virginia, the process of being called to the ministry was a very interesting one. Usually the call came when the individual was sitting in church. Without warning, the one called would fall upon the floor as if struck by a bullet and would lie there for hours, speechless and motionless. Then the news would spread all through the neighborhood that this individual had received a call. If he were inclined to resist the summons, he would fall or be made to fall a second or third time. In the end, he would always yielded to the call. While I wanted an education badly, I confess that in my youth I had a fear that when I had learned to read and write very well, I would receive one of these calls, but for some reason my call never came. Oh man.
Yeah, that's great.
Like subtle humor, that
He had a lot of
tossed
good
in
humor in there. He talked about being like afraid to public speak and stuff at first as well. I remember and got through it, but just a great man. Great
yeah,
book. Check it out. Very powerful
awesome.
read.
Make it the first one you read if you want to look. If you're feeling like a guilty white person, or you want to learn about Black history or slaves, read the book Up from Slavery.
Yep. Appreciate it.
Thanks all.
Subscribe. Like this video. Appreciate it. Later.